It just applies to everything.
Yeah,
And
I think for me, the big delineator is the differentiation between being intentional and being transactional.
yeah.
I did this myself even as recently as last year. So I had gone to work as a fractional CMO in 2024, and I got laid off in December, like right at Christmas time. And I had sort of stepped away from my business and I wasn't doing a whole lot with it. And so, I mean, this is like one of the big pushes for sort of our reinvention this last year was that like all of a sudden I'm thrust back into my business. What we started to discover is what we call the 10-year overnight success. We talked to a lot of these CEOs and a lot of guys who are millionaires or they're executives that have done really well or whatever, all these things. And we all look at people through this lens or this snapshot that is, oh, well, you're doing really great now, right? And so, and that's how we think it always was.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to Market to Me, presented by Baron and Ryan. I'm your host, Joe Baron. And today, I'm sitting down with Ryan Roghaar, an entrepreneur, creative director. Ryan is the former founder of R2 Media, and today, he's the founder of Rogue Health, where he helps medical device leaders assess commercial readiness and make smarter decisions before time, capital, and credibility are at risk. Also, he's the host of the Eggs podcast, where he has thoughtful conversations around business, creativity, and leadership. Ryan's journey spans agency life, remote work, long before it was normal. He's done music, or been involved in music, publishing, and now consulting about the common thread through all of its relationships. How you show up, how you build trust, and how businesses stay human in a world that's increasingly automated. Ryan, welcome aboard, my friend.
Hey Joe, I'm stoked to be here, dude. I like you kind of touched on. We had a conversation many moons ago at this point at Creative. What was it? Weapons of Mass Creation Fest in Cleveland, Ohio. I don't even know what year. I still have over here. You can't really see it off frame, but I got my Stefan Sagmeister autographed bag there while we were at that event. But that was the first time I met you, Joe, and a whole crew of dudes that were super friendly and willing to let me hang. And so I've always appreciated that about you. And then, yeah, recently sort of reconnected with you through the MCA group and sort of a loose check-in that we've kind of done over the last several years. So
Yeah.
Anyway, glad to be here and glad to be a part of the new show, dude. Excited. Congratulations.
Thank you. For those who don't know, MCA stands for More Creative Academy. It's Michael Janda's creative community. Ryan, you've been working creatively and independently since about 2005, where you did that remotely, mostly. Whether it's on, that was what, around the tour bus when you were managing the bands? Would you say that would be correct?
Yeah, I can talk about it a little bit. So my whole life, I've basically been relatively artistic. I always drew, I always painted, I always did all this stuff. My grandmother was a painter and a sculptor, and so she sort of helped me go down that path, but I always liked to draw and stuff. So that sort of eventually turned into something where I chased another passion of mine, which was music, and I started to follow a bunch of different bands around, eventually working my way up to managing some of them and supporting them in different ways. And I started doing concert posters and things like that for fun, and what ended up happening was I got to the point where I was doing so many free concert posters for my friends' bands that eventually I had to start charging for it. And then all of a sudden you're in a creative business, right? You're charging for design work. So that was sort of the early days. You know, at that time I went by just by my name. It was just Ryan Roghaar, independent graphic designer back in those days. And so I did that for a number of years. Eventually I had this moment where I was like, you know what, I've got to, I guess, grow up and like, how do I turn this thing into a real business, right? So, you know, like everybody does, I went right to the internet and I tried to find names that sounded impressive. So I tried to put together names that sounded like an agency. So we landed on the really creative R2 Media Group, which was sort of the first formalization of my business. R2, wildly creative, just Ryan Roghaar, and Media Group, some words I heard online. And much later, I found out that Media Group had more to do with, you know, buying media and placements and things like that than it had to do with design work and all those things. So eventually we dropped it and just became R2. We ended up operating under that name for nearly 20 years, since 2005. And then just, the beginning of this year, first thing, January 1, we were reborn as Rogue Health, focusing more on med tech and med device clients now than ever before. So anyway, that's kind of the crash course, but I'm happy to talk about anything else.
Which bands are the worst to be with and which ones were fantastic to tour with?
You know, everybody we toured with was awesome. And a lot of the bands we were with were, you know, I guess, I don't know. They were big in their genre, but not huge bands, right? Probably the biggest band I worked with was called the Cottonmouth Kings. They were kind of a Cypress Hill, super pot centric kind of band. And but they were great. They've been, brothers of mine for years and years now, and that was the band I sort of started, doing concert work for and street team type stuff for. Eventually, I moved on to some other bands on their label, Mix Mob, and then ultimately OPM. And actually, the lead singer from OPM is one of our clients today. So it's kind of fun how those early relationships, are now feeding what we're doing. So so it's really cool. But I think probably the most or closest thing to like a starstruck band we ever played with was D12. Eminem wasn't there at the time, but the rest of the guys were, and we got to see dudes like Proof and stuff. So it was a good deal, and we met a lot of really cool people along the way. No bad experiences.
And that's great, because it's all about networking and building relationships, and people value relationships. And
Yeah.
you think, what do you think that people don't talking about networking when it comes to like real opportunity, whether that's job or just looking for a project? It just seems like people should be out there talking more and connecting.
Yeah, so it seems to me, and it's actually one of the big revelations that we had in our own business in kind of the middle, maybe 2006 or 8 or something like that. When my family moved to Utah, our boys got involved with the Spanish immersion program. And so they started learning basically 50% of their day in Spanish. And we felt like that was a really cool opportunity for them. And one way that we could sort of expand or maybe take advantage of that program was to start hosting interns that were coming over here from Spain to teach in the program. So we had our first intern, her name's Anna, and she lives just outside of Barcelona. And over the time that she was staying with us, she spent a lot of time talking about her people back home, right? And of all the interns we had, she was actually the only one that was just like dying to get home. Everybody else is looking for work over here or whatever, but she was just like, man, I just want to get back to my people. Like, and it was really, kind of, I don't know, like, I guess kind of endearing. I mean, I get that like everybody understands familial relationships and friends and things like that. But like for me at that time, I was working for an ad agency here in the city, and so I was working for them like 8 to 5, and then I was running my business from like 6 or 7 till like 2 in the morning. And I did that every day for 5 years. And I was really doing that hustle life, right? Like it was so popular for a little while there where everybody was trying to Gary V themselves into working 20-hour days and all this kind of stuff. I thought I was doing really good and I was impressive and just like thinking of all the stuff I was doing, but now in retrospect, I look at that time and I go, man, that was really selfish. I had a couple of young kids, I had a wife, all that stuff, and I was just busy. So fast forward like a year later, Anna's gone home, and we decided that I'm going to make a trip out there to meet her and her family in Spain. It's my first trip over there. And I remember I always tell this story. It's a little self-deprecating, but I always tell this story that I show up over there like, I guess, super annoying American with my fancy giant watch and my Louis Vuitton wallet and my, all this stuff that I thought was cool. And I could really signal to these guys how, I was successful and had
As
made
you
it,
should, shock and awe, baby.
Exactly, right? Here's this big American guy, and I'm going to show up, look at my all my cool stuff. And it was like immediately apparent that didn't matter to anybody over there. And not to say that, this is obviously a focus group of a few people, but like my cool factor had almost nothing to do with their willingness to take me in. I came to know a lot of her friends and a lot of her family, and even now have familial relationships with them. I mean, I met her, or I went and saw her mother and grandmother just this last. We spent a lot of time building relationships over there. And at the time I spoke no Spanish, and most of her friends speak no English or very little English. Couldn't have been more comfortable. And for me, as dumb as it sounds, it was wildly impactful. It really helped me understand sort of the importance of people versus the importance of things. And even though I felt like kind of a dummy, at the end, I think I really grew from that trip. And so when we came home, we went from being what we called our, just being a traditional ad agency to what we were calling a brand relationship consultancy. And the idea was that we were trying to not just, trick people into buying products or services from our customers, but rather develop actual relationships with the people who engage with our products, right? So if we're marketing for a car dealer or whatever, then we're working on how can we improve relationships between car dealers and the people who buy from them. And it was just a little subtle shift of perspective, but it was such a focus on relationships that now it sort of permeates everything we do. And it's funny because just like the example you were using about the bands and networking and how funny it is, here it is, 20 years later or whatever. I mean, I started with Cottonmouth Kings when I was like 18. So, even more than 20 years later, I guess, we are now still talking to the same people and still having, relationships. And, like I say, the one is a client currently. And so it's kind of a fun deal that, all that happens. But the reason that happened was because all those relationships were me giving more than I was getting from them at the time. Right. So at the time, the bands I was working for, things like that, bands, they don't have a lot of money. They're not paying people for things. So I was a big part of their street teams. And I was outside hanging flyers and taking pictures and sending in film and all this stuff from back in the olden days. So I was giving a ton of myself, right? So then when I saw the band or whatever, when they would come through town, they were excited to see me and they wanted to spend time with me and get to know me and all that stuff, because here's this guy that was just giving to them, I don't do any business anymore with like any of the Cottonmouth Kings guys or any of those people, and their band has evolved and changed over the years. But like if I encountered any of them on the street somewhere, it would be, like a family reunion. And with the guy that I'm working with presently, same thing. I managed his band for a couple tours, and, we kind of hit it off, and we've touched base here and there over the years and tried to figure out how to keep it going. And now there's an opportunity. But we've literally been working on this for, maybe 10, 15 years, something like that. So it's like, it took a long time to get here, but it did. And so I think the big differentiator, especially as it pertains to relationship development versus like networking, is I feel like, and I could be wrong about this, but in my mind, networking feels transactional. Like I'm out there trying to network with you. I need business. I need a deal, whatever. I'm networking. Yeah. And I don't think that people use the phrase in a way that is meant to be negative or have a bad connotation to it. I think what they're trying to say is I'm out trying to make relationships and build my network. But I think if we can step away from sort of this transactional nature of relationship building or I guess sort of networking in the frame of business versus just real live relationship development, where you go out and you develop the things that, where so people can know, like, and trust you, those key factors, I think, end up becoming the thing that will get you the recommendation. I always say I would hire somebody that I know, like, and trust hands down over somebody who may actually have a better portfolio or be better connected or whatever, because I'd rather have the person I want to work with. Like we'll figure out the business, we'll train, we'll learn how to do stuff, whatever, but I'd really rather work with somebody that I already know and like and trust.
Yeah, and I think that's very important, because there's been cases where that's happened to me. We both know Anderson Blue. He's been on the podcast, and if you haven't listened to that episode, you can listen. It's a good one. We're close. He wanted to he knew that I provided good work, wanted to put some money in my pocket, and that's fantastic. And then somebody else that we met from 10 years ago, maybe, when we were at WMC Fest, she hired me for a project where it was consistent for a bit, which was nice. It was through relationships, but not until, fairly recently was where they were like, hey, can you do this? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, we spoke, and it's good to be able to have that conversation and be like, oh, it's like we seen each other yesterday, and we catch up, but it's like, it's friendly, and it's not this awkward, first date. We're super polite, and I think we work well together. Do we go in for the kiss or not, or which in business world, do we sign the contract? Do we pay? Do we transactional? None of that.
I guess it depends on
none of those shenanigans. Yeah, no. See, No, so none of this tomfoolery. But it is something where it really is important, where, you're right. Networking does get a bad rap in the sense when people, I'm networking, but it does feel like you do need to build a relationship. Like, being part of a chamber of commerce, the one that I'm at, if some of it feels, and I was speaking to one of the chair people of it, and she wanted to change the way it operates, because it just feels, some of the businesses are it's geared towards big business, and it's like, but what about the many small businesses around that we could network and actually know who they are and work directly with them? So it seems like it's super important, and it feels like you've experienced that with the bands, even though they're up to their lollygagging and malarkey and stuff like that, where it's all fun and games. It just applies to everything. And,
I think for me, the big delineator is the differentiation between being intentional and being transactional.
Yeah.
Right. And so to your point, and I did this myself even as recently as last year. So I had gone to work as a fractional CMO in 2024, and I got laid off in December, like right at Christmas time. And I had sort of stepped away from my business, and I wasn't doing a whole lot with it. And so, this is like one of the big pushes for sort of our reinvention this last year, was that like all of a sudden I'm thrust back into my business. There's no clients, no money, no nothing. And we have to start over. And what really happened to me that I guess kind of spooked me a little bit is I spent the first 4 months of the year trying to get a job. I was just like, well, I'll just go back in agency. I'll go work for somebody.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people know me or like me or whatever. Like I'll just find some, something to put food on the table, and then we'll sort out the rest. And in 4 months, I got 0 calls back. And, I was even told by people that I know inside companies that I wasn't what they were looking for. And so it was really discouraging to me. And my wife actually came to me, and she has done this more than once, but most recently she came to me and was just like, dude, the one thing that has lasted all these years for you was basically you. Like, you have this freelance business, or you have this ability to do whatever you do. People like you, whatever. Just like, stop trying to do other people's stuff. Do you. And so that was the big switch for us, is that we focused on that. And so this year we got pushing real hard on networking and things like that. That's how I reconnected with Michael Janda that you mentioned before. That's how I reconnected with you, really, through MCA and some of that stuff. I mean, these connections were rebuilt based on sort of the foundations of the olden days, but the intention was totally different, right? I wasn't going to people. Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm curious, because everyone has different tactics, different ways of going about it. One thing that I know with you, especially if you're new consulting business, we'll discuss in a bit, is that you seem to be a connector of people. You seem to know who they value. A lot of people value you because of your connections and of your network. So like, what networking or value relationship tactics or tips could you provide to people who are listening and they are in a similar position, or they want to be able to improve their community, their network, and their range of people that they can
Yeah, well, and I think, just to kind of circle back to the point, I think intention versus transaction is a big thing to focus on. It's a little bit scary, and especially as, I'm sure a lot of freelancers and people who listen to this show and other stuff will have gone through these sort of feast and famine cycles, right? Where you end up at the bottom of the pit and you're like, man, I have just got to get some money. I just need something to do. So I will say it does feel uncomfortable sometimes to just be kind of giving of yourself for the sake of giving, or like building a relationship for the sake of building a relationship. Like, you feel like you need to be doing work that turns into money. And I think, that's true. I mean, obviously you've got, bills to pay, things like that. So people do need to do that. But I think that the big change for me, and, this happened years ago, so this is why I have a decent network today, is by changing the mode where I wasn't trying to get something out of you, but I was trying to give something to you. That made it really easy for people to open up, to disarm, to start to develop trust and a real relationship with me, where I wasn't just the dude trying to hawk design stuff to them, And then by doing that, then in retrospect, and we can talk more about this with the new consultancy, but now I've got this bench of people that are participating in our consultancy that have expertise in a million different realms that I could not develop that stuff. But it's because I didn't go to them and pitch them. And now I'm actively trying to find them work. You know what I mean? Like, our whole dynamic is different. And, like I say, we do a lot of things out of desperation, which is the, this feast famine thing. A lot of people have written about the feast and famine cycle and that kind of thing.
Do you feel that people, they could feel that desperation on?
Oh yeah, and I totally get it. Yeah, like I was saying, in 2024, when I came back to, or well, I guess it would have been January 2025 when I came back to work for myself. Like, those first 4 months were terrifying. I mean, and maybe I was being irresponsible. I've never, considered myself the best business person in the world. But, we'd put everything on the credit card and then pay it off at the end of the month and rack up our miles and do all that kind of stuff. Well, we decided to take the boys to New York for Christmas. We went to a Giants game. We went to an Islanders game. Like, we just did all this stuff, right? But everything went on a credit card. So it was, whatever, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, whatever it was by the time the Christmas holidays were done. And then I got laid off on the 28th. And there was no severance and there was no nothing. And so it went from, okay, well, you had a nice steady paycheck to now you have $0. And we had spent it all at the holidays. And so come January 1, I had a bunch of new debt and I had no clear path to income. And so, like I say, I mean, at first I was like, oh yeah, no, I'll just find something. It's no big deal. Lots of, there are lots of agencies out there, but the world of agency is crazy right now. People are getting laid off left and right. And, there's all kinds of different situations happening in a lot of those agencies that made it really hard for me to find work. And so, the pressure is on, like the squeeze is happening, right? When you're putting everything on a credit card and you're just trying to figure out how to live. And the example I use, I mean, I will say, we have one client that sort of weathered the CMO time of my life. So we spun that back up and we got busy with the one client. And so that sort of took the edge off a little bit because at least we had some income. Yeah. It wasn't enough, but it was some income. But that income allowed us to at least move forward, right? And so it did allow me or gave me the freedom to at least be sort of networking in the way I wanted to network, which was, and I think people come from all kinds of different backgrounds and are interested in doing this in different ways. But for me, like, I feel a little dirty asking for business, right? Like, I'd rather have a conversation than just flat out say, hey, dude, I need some work. Like, can you help me? And so all of my conversations are very loose, very casual. How do I get to know you? You know, what can I do for you? How can I help? You know, here, let me do this for you, you know, whatever. Very rarely is it transactional. And so I think that for me anyway, has allowed me to build a network that's more robust now. But I think when you're in the moment, it's really hard to see all.
But that was due to the circumstance, and that you had a pivot. You know that.
Well, and I would say too, there isn't really a right or a wrong, right? I mean, you can do work that's strictly transactional. For the longest time, that's all we did. You know, we didn't know a lot of our clients. We never met them in person. We just worked over the internet, and had very little relationship with those people. But it was like, hey, I have a project, and you do those, so cool. And
that's yeah, you're right. No, that's fine.
So that's right
there's a lot of stuff.
too. Yeah, and you can do it through Fiverr or Upwork or other things like that. I just haven't had a lot of luck with platforms like that in my own experience. So I tend to find that, the actual relationship building is more valuable for me in the long run. But I will say that it is a longer run. It's not not short term.
Yeah, that is a marathon, because you can't just give like, hey, it's not like, what was it, Step Brothers? Like, did we just become best friends? It's not kind of that situation where it's like you can start working together and somebody's going to throw you work, or you're going to vice versa, where it connects. It's kind of a, coffee. All right, you seem like a cool guy, and then eventually, and it's happened with me where I took somebody on for a project. I was like, hey, you're going to be my media guy, my PR person, my media magician, I will call him, like, because if somebody needs that, I could offer that service. We could, work something out as a partnership, and then I provide a lot more creative. You provide all the stuff they need, but things happen here and there. But that's an opportunity, and that's because of through a connection, and the connections happen weirdly everywhere.
And I think that right there, Joe, is a really good point. The connections really are everywhere, And so I think, and I keep forgetting to say this, but I mean, if you look back at your own life, and I don't know if everyone's the same, obviously this is a broad generalization, but if I look at every job I've ever had, real jobs working for people or working for myself, every job I've ever had has come by way of somebody who knew somebody, or somebody who made a recommendation, or a friend, or whatever who vouched for me. Like, everything's that way. My first job was at Shopko a million years ago. It was like a department store, but my friend Curtis worked there, and he put in a good word for me, so I got in. Then I earned my way once I was there, but it required somebody, opening the door for me, and all the way to, when I first took my job in agency, the first agency I ever worked at when I moved from Idaho to Utah, same thing. I had sent out letters to 20 or 25 different agencies in between Boise and Salt Lake City, because Pocatello, Idaho, where I was from, is sort of right in the middle, but it's a smaller city and no agencies there. So I had sent letters out to all these places, basically offering a month of my design work in exchange for the opportunity to just be on the fly on the wall somewhere and learn about their business. And of all the agencies I reached out to, the only one that responded to me is an agency here in Salt Lake, actually just down the block from where I live now, called Thomas Arts. And it just worked out by random happenstance that the guy that owns Thomas Arts was my mom's cousin's husband. And so when they saw my name come in on the letter, I didn't run this through my mom or anything, but when they saw my name come in the letter, they knew my name, and they went, oh, okay, I know who Ryan is. And so they gave me a little bit of grace, right? A lot of companies don't want to give up the boardrooms and stuff like that. They don't want some dude creeping around.
Absolutely.
But Thomas Arts let me. I worked for a month for free, and at the end of the month, we shook hands, and we had a really good relationship, and everyone was cool. And then 2 years later, when they had an opening, they called me to see if I'd come down, and I ended up coming down and working for them. And that was the big move to Utah. So even the things that I feel like I've self-made and that I've done all on my own, it doesn't mean that I didn't take the impetus to reach out, right? I mean, I reached out to Thomas Arts on my own. I reached out to the bands, or the record labels back in the olden days and stuff like that. Like, I mean, I took the step to do the thing, but I offered something of myself for free. I didn't even ask them for something, I was like, hey, in exchange for, being the cool guy in town, or maybe getting some free tickets to your concert, will you, let me put stickers on my car?
So I have two things that thought made me think. Self-made is kind of like a fallacy. It's not real, and because you always need to connect with people. I mean, like you said, you have to take the first step. And anything in the situation where you believe you could do something, it's not going to happen, like that. You got to put in the work. That's the whole process. You put the step forward, you reach out, and then you hope for people to help you, hope for people to connect you with the right people. I still have people reaching out to me. A guy who tutored me in math, like when I was in high school, reaching out, connect with this person. They're starting their own digital agency, and he connected me. Nothing happened. It's more of he was thinking of me, and maybe down the line. But again, it's just connection, and you're being self-made and say you're working.
Yeah, and I'll just comment on that self-made thing too, if you can hang on to your second point for a second. I would just add to it, even if you're born with money, right? You're born into a family, like somebody's done that work, right? You're not self-made.
Absolutely.
And I think at the end of the day, even if you're trying to build a business, you hear all these stories of the guy who hustled and self-made millionaire or whatever. No, somebody gave him money in exchange for what he did. He is not self-made. But I think the big point is, for most self-made people or folks that we would sort of qualify as being self-made, most of them did the first part, which was they reached out, or they had the initiative to begin, or they weren't afraid to try, or whatever it was. And then the rest followed. They built on the backs of their customers who believed in them and were willing to give them money, or they built on the friends and family relationships, or they, whatever it was they did. But at the end of the day, the only thing that makes you self-made or not self-made is starting. And so I think for a lot of, especially young entrepreneurs or designers or people like that are trying to build a career or whatever, I think that's it, is just, you give of yourself. We had a guy on our podcast, a guy named Bob Berg. Bob Berg is the author or the co-author of this book called The Go-Giver. And it's a really common book that comes up a lot of times when people are talking about sales or growing companies or whatever. They always think of the Go-Giver books. He did a version of this phrase that I use all the time, which is, people do business with folks they know, like, and trust. Yep. And like we talked about earlier, those things are like sort of the key pillars of any kind of relationship. I think self-made or not, if you don't have those things, then you can't be self-made. You know what I mean? You've got to develop those. So I think at the end of everything, behind all the bluster and the smoke screen and the social media accounts and all that stuff, like really at the end of the day, it took somebody to start, and then it took relationships with other people to get it done.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be about starting your own business. It could be just even trying to get into a position that you want to get a job at a company. You have to take the initiative. I remember speaking to a recruiter one time, and he was like, you got to just make the connections. You got to open up. You got to speak to someone who's in that company that you want to work for, and see if they could introduce you to them. And then from there, it's a first step, and then becomes like a warm lead, whether you want to do the project or you're looking for the position to be hired for. It's just kind of like it's that first step that I think for some reason a lot of people are afraid of, especially when they start their own business. But it's if you think of it as somebody who's fine and content where you are and just want a different job or just want that extra salary, it's rare to be in one job and that raise keeps coming every year. You kind of have to bounce from department to department or different other companies.
And I have a related thought to that too. So I was on LinkedIn one afternoon, and I started just kind of flipping through stuff. And every now and then, I see different groups of people talking. And I came across this thread that was a bunch of people in like sort of the UI, UX world. And they were all talking about how much trouble they were having getting jobs, right? And they're like, oh, I applied at 200 places and I applied at 300 places and blah, blah, blah. No word back. Nobody's talking to me or anything. And I got noodling on that a little bit. And I've actually written a couple essays on this. But what I think it is obviously procrastination and fear and all these kinds of things are related. But I think what we're doing is online, you have the opportunity to do a lot of stuff, do a lot of thrashing around, and it feels like you've accomplished something, right? So if you're putting in resumes all day, like to the extent that you're putting out hundreds of resumes for people, right? That feels like you're doing something. And so people get, I guess, sort of satisfied with that. And they go, okay, you know what? I put in 40 applications today. Think of all I've done, whatever it is. But it's like, in reality, what would probably be more valuable would be if you chose the company that you wanted to work for or narrowed it down to 10, and you reached out to some executive leadership or maybe a department lead or something in a part of the company that you want to work for. And then you see if they'd be willing to get on a phone call with you, or maybe maybe it's in your city and you can meet them for lunch, or whatever. Like, people are really generous with their time. And
I think my question is I always find it, I always like hearing people's tactics about that, because some people, you're going in cold. So, and nobody likes cold emails. I've connected with people, they accepted, and I had vice versa, we accepted, and it's trying to find that genuine conversation starter to get in, like, hey, thanks for connecting me on LinkedIn. I would love your work if you're a designer or whatever. Like, and you mentioned something specific, like I've done that. If you're interested, would you mind hopping on a call? I'd love to connect with other creatives and see, go from there. And then from there, I mean, that's just one example of many, but it just feels like it's again, it's like dating. It's how do you open up? Sometimes, you have the, hey, your friend's cute. Can you introduce me? It's that compared to, I see that person at the bar. Come here often? Would you like a drink? I mean, like, it's kind of like, they're like, no, like, get away from me. It's
well,
like,
I think it goes
opening.
back to that sort of intention versus, or, being intentional versus being transactional. And a good example of this, for example, was when we started doing work in Spain or trying to do work in Spain. And in full transparency, we haven't really won anything in Spain, but we're trying. But the big difference sort of culturally is here in the States, when we started our business, I was working with companies from all over the country, but like they didn't need to know me. Like I say, it was very transactional. It was like, hey, I need this brochure built. Can you do it? Yes. Okay, cool. Handshake and we're good. So in Spain, though, everybody's, as I talked about earlier in sort of my little Spain story, everybody's really tied to relationships, right? I mean, you're basically competing with somebody else they know that does what you do, right? So like they're going to use their cousin before they use me. You know what I mean? They're going to use somebody they know, like, and trust. And so when we were trying to develop relationships with people in Spain, I mean, for a while I was going over there, 3, 4, 5 times a year just to try and meet with people. And because I didn't speak any Spanish, I was meeting mostly Dutch nationals that were living in Spain and who were working in Spanish companies, because Dutch people all have, pretty good English. So, so I could go and talk to those guys, but do it in Spain. And so, but the guys that I was meeting that were Spanish, it was like the barrier to entry was so great because I'm competing with everybody they know. And, and that's probably happening here in America to some extent. But I think that sort of mindset wise, we are willing to maybe take a chance a little bit more on somebody that, we kind of trust, or a friend told us about them, or, their stuff looks reputable online. I think we're maybe a little more willing to take a shot on something like that than my experience with Spanish people anyway. I think it's kind of an interesting dynamic, but I think to your point, using sort of the dating metaphor is totally right. Like, take an interest in what they're doing. Listen to them. If you want to work at Apple, I mean, start, if you want to work at Apple, like, start, I don't know, if you want to work in marketing or you want to be a designer at Apple, for example, like, I don't know, find some Apple designers on Instagram and, start following their accounts, or, find them on LinkedIn and then follow them on Instagram and get into their work. And when you see what they're doing, compliment them and let them know. But to your point, just like the dating, the relationships that last the longest are the ones that you spent time developing, right? Most of the time you end up meeting somebody at work, or you end up meeting a friend of a friend or something like that. And the reason is because you didn't just cold call them and say, hey, baby, what's up? You look good. Let's go. Like, it's not that. Instead, it's, yeah. Instead, it's like, hey, my friend Jason thought I'd be really cool for you. He said that you're on looking for a new relationship and you really like Italian food. I love Italian food. Let's go do this, And, but just that like sort of warm handshake that made that introduction is going to help that relationship thrive, where something cold or purely based on looks or some other transactional metric or whatever is not going to thrive in the same way. Now some of those might work out, but but if they start that way, that's not generally the best place to start, at least not in my experience.
Yeah. It can only hold up for so long unless you have a really, you're both.
Yeah, it might work out. Like maybe it's great, and there's nothing wrong with, picking that hot chick or hot dude that, at the bar that you want to take your shot with. And it may work out great. But, but I do think, like, generally speaking, if it's just like, well, I'm really only interested in dating this person because they're gorgeous, I don't know if that's, the best metric in the long. There are clients that are going to try and lowball you, or maybe they'll give you enough money and you're willing to take the deal today. But then when they want you 5 years later for that same $25 an hour, it's like, okay, well, now you're just trying to take advantage of me. And so I think that there's a correlation there, which is, in relationships more generally, I think that, a relationship could be based on something transactional in the moment, but the relationships that last or go on to be multi-year agency relationships or those kinds of things are not usually built that way. Usually it's built on, maybe was the gateway drug, maybe you did a brochure for them or something and they loved it. Yeah. But then through constant execution and doing a good job and being priced fairly and being worth the money they're spending on you, et cetera, then you've built a relationship that really lasts, or can stand the test of time in terms of like an agency client or something like that.
Yeah, no one wants to be bamboozled. Speaking of giving too much away for free, you mentioned earlier that, you would always give something away for free or transactional. Was there a point where you were giving too much of your time or design or energy where you weren't being reciprocated properly? I mean, obviously at one point with the posters, that was early on in the career. We've all done that. We all have friends who are in a band. We were trying to get in, do cool work or whatever, but then we eventually have to charge. But was there a point where, aside from like bands, but also in other businesses where you give too much, you're trying to nurture these relationships, but you're giving, and nothing comes out. Again, it's also like dating too. Sometimes people break up because it's too much of give. Now I got to charge you for, for my time, my work. It doesn't seem to be like a fair work relationship.
Well, I think just to, keep with the dating metaphor, I mean, having a partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, or a business partner is kind of the same thing, right? I mean, it still demands the same thing from you in terms of a relationship, right? Like there's some give, there's some take, there's some things like that. And if one side or the other isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing, you can either, I don't know, bring in a third and get polyamorous or something and fill that gap, or you can try and clean up your relationships. And sometimes, it does become necessary to let people go or, to fire a client on occasion if they're not willing to meet you somewhere. Sometimes it's not even out of malice, but like, when you move from being a $35 an hour designer to a $70 an hour designer. Some people can afford $35 an hour, but they're not willing to spend $70 an hour. So that means you might lose a relationship. And that happens in human relationships too. Maybe you move somewhere in your career and it requires something of you. You're going to have to move. You're going to have to do whatever. And your partner's not willing to move and you're not willing to give up your job. So you hit the impasse, right? And so, and then you either split up or you figure out how to work through it. And it's kind of like that with a client, right? I mean, if your client has got, their numbers or their economics are based on something that just doesn't work for you anymore, then it doesn't make any sense to preserve that relationship. And all of us will probably have an example of something like this where we stayed in too long or we're being taken advantage of financially, And I noticed, like for me in particular, as I sort of ramped up in my rates, there were big periods of time where I was working for other clients for less money and charging newer clients more money. And for me, that always felt like a little bit yucky because it's like, well, if you can get me for $25, why is this person paying $50? So there's kind of this like weird dynamic there. And so, but what really should have happened is I should have gone to my $25 an hour client and said, well, now I'm $50 an hour. So if you want to keep working with me, that's the new rate. But instead, what I did is I drug them along because it was good to keep that money coming in and stuff like that. And then I'm selling myself short if I believe that I'm truly a $50 an hour person, but I'm charging $25 to somebody, then really I'm a $25 an hour person who's sort of charading as a, or masquerading as a $50 an hour person. So I think
that's an interesting viewpoint.
I don't think it's wrong either. Like I just want to kind of say that with everything, like there is no right or wrongs here. Like it's not a judgment call.
Everybody has a different view of success or what their lifestyle is. I mean, some people could have 5 kids and be comfortable working whatever job that they have, and that's perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Or people could just be like, hustle. Yeah. Maybe they show up to the kids' basketball game once in a while, but they're too busy hustling to make sure that there's food on the table. They live in a nice house. Everybody's view and perspective is totally different. That's on them. And you're right. There's no right and wrong. But for certain people, maybe they want to find something down in the middle. There's a middle ground somewhere. But like as what you were saying is that, you're masquerading as a $50 designer at one point in your career. But we both know a person that every month they raise their prices, like I think about 5-10%, something, just a little bit, just so it's an increase. So it seems like we need to be self-aware that we're not giving too much of our time, that we want to be able to have a fair work-life balance. Because I think everybody nowadays realize that mental health is a big thing, regardless if it's just for your own sanity or you want to go hang out, walk your dog more, or play with your kids, or just you found a new passion for cooking and you want to try all these ingredients. You need to go to the supermarket or to a particular butcher shop for whatever for those ingredients. So it feels like we have to pay attention on what is our price point, what's our breaking point, and follow through with that.
Well, and I think that's good. And I think I might just caveat it like sort of within reason, right? So I think part of it is just making sure that your expectations align with what you're willing to do. So,
absolutely.
Just working more, just hustling more doesn't really equate to more money or whatever. Like you can probably make more money for less hours if you really hone your craft and become a specialist in something, right? Like you could,
and that used to be a thing with the designers where they would just always like, hey, I'm burning that midnight oil.
Yeah.
And let's get that money. I'm like, does it really?
Yeah, like I said, I'm totally guilty of doing that. When I'm making $25 an hour and I'm working overnights, I'm missing time with my family. I'm missing time with my kids. I'm missing time with whatever. I'm bringing my laptop to the soccer fields. I'm doing all this stuff. But then at this point, I charge enough more per hour that like just, having this call is more than I would have made in that whole day of thrashing. But I do think that there's a little bit of a ramp, right? Like, you can't start as a, $500 an hour consultant or whatever. You have to build into these things. And so I think as long as you build your expectation in, or manage your expectations, I should say, to that sort of lifestyle design. Because I will say that, I mean, one of the very coolest things about being sort of a guy who's been a lifelong freelancer, I've been able to go tour with different bands. Like my favorite singer is this Danish pop singer named Mo. And whenever she comes to the US, I follow her around for 4 or 5 cities and stuff like that. I do these kinds of things. So by being independent and being sort of running my own little operation here, it bought me the flexibility to do those things and live some life and travel and do the things I want to do. I went to Spain last year. I went to London last year. I did a bunch of these things. Even though, like, financially, it probably didn't really make sense to do that. But the relationships I built along the way are now proving very valuable. So it was a calculated gamble. But, I built those relationships and I sustained those relationships, and it's been worth it. But so I guess, not to spin out too much, but the point I'm trying to make is, like, if you want to have this life where you are home with your kid or you're able to take your dog for walks and all that stuff, like, you can certainly build it. You just need to understand that the expectation versus what you can actually generate in terms of income or whatever, like, you can't go into your business half cracked and not spend any time honing your craft and that stuff and want to live in a big house with a cool car and all that kind of stuff. Like, you can't have both ways generally. Maybe you can develop expertise and become kind of a pro in one thing and make, sufficient income to do that. But I don't think you can. I guess the moral of the story is you have to work for what you want. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to burn the midnight oil or do the, 18-hour day shifts and stuff. Like, I don't think it has to be that. But I think you definitely have to be willing to put in the effort that is sort of commensurate with what you want to earn.
That's very true. I mean, it's just, work within reason. That's it for what works for your lifestyle.
And I mean, there's no shortage of dudes that are working 12-hour shifts in the mine and not making any money and, coming home to their little crappy trailer. And, there's no shortage of those guys either, So, I mean, being able to talk about, I get to spend 10 hours a day or 8 hours a day sitting in front of my computer, talking to people I like, going on podcasts like yours, Joe, spending time with people that I want to meeting a friend for lunch, all those kinds of things. Yeah, I mean, my gig's pretty sweet compared to that, but are we where we need to be at financially? No. Is there still debt that's got to be paid off from last year's damage? Yes. Is there, it's not perfect, but nonetheless, I'm able to, construct a lifestyle that works more or less for me. I can't be too extravagant. I don't have my Porsche yet, these kinds of things, but maybe one day. So the work I'm putting in now is laying the foundations for that. There's a thing that we've discovered on our podcast. So our show is kind of a business show. We have a lot of startup founders and, but everybody. Joe's been on our show. He was really early. What we started to discover is what we call the 10-year overnight success. And so we talked to a lot of these CEOs and a lot of guys who are like, I don't know, self-made, or they're millionaires, or they're executives that have done really well, or whatever, all these things. And we all look at people through this lens or this snapshot that is, oh, well, you're doing really great now. Right. And that's how we think it always was. But everybody has the same kind of stories that you or I or anybody does, which is the hard times, the good times, the bad times, the failures, the successes. Everybody's got that stuff. So at the end, you've got what we call the 10-year overnight success. And, it's basically every person we've talked to, these executives, they all have a 10-year streak of tripping and falling and all this stuff. And I think as long as you understand that, then you can take this sort of stance or this view that I do a lot, which is the idea that every step I've ever taken is what it was required to get to where I am today. And it's not like it's super profound and, it doesn't need to be on a t-shirt or anything, but it helps me stave off regret, or every time I start thinking like I did the wrong thing or made a bad decision or whatever, I go, well, the reason I'm talking to Joe today is because of every step I've taken so far, right? And that makes kind of everything okay, right? There was no other path to me meeting Joe this afternoon. The path to Joe was by meandering through life and ending up here today. I think that if everybody can kind of wrap their head around that notion, you'll know that whatever decisions you're making today are not concrete. You're not going to live with it forever. I mean, unless you're making crazy choices, I guess. But if you're just, trying to be a designer, or you're trying to build a business, or you're trying to do whatever, like, the decisions you're making now will change next year. They'll change in 5 years. They'll change in 10 years. Everything's going to grow and evolve and change. So there's no risk. Like, go for it. Like, make that decision and move, and like we talked about earlier in the show, like, about being intentional and just being the one who moves. If you want to be self-made, or you want to be successful in business, or you want to be successful just in human relationships, like we've been talking about, take that first step, and maybe it is, walking up to the girl at the bar and just saying, hey, what's up? I'm Joe, I'm Ryan, I'd like to meet you, that kind of thing. Or it's at a networking event and you walk up to the CEO of your favorite company and you let them know how awesome you think they are.
No truer words have been spoken. I mean, maybe they have, but no, it's a very good point. I mean,
if I said it, definitely somebody was more true than me. But the point is that I think, at least in my philosophy, that makes a lot of sense. And as you probably sort of got caught the scent of during this conversation, all roads lead back to personal relationships, and I think that that's the moral of the story. And so I think if people can start to focus their energy on that, think about, the relationships they're close to, think about the relationships that are further away. There's folks that you like, there's folks that are just acquaintances, there's folks that you don't really know that well, but they come around every now and then. You've got an uncle that shows up every third Thanksgiving, you've got a whole spectrum of relationships.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, you can focus and be intentional with your efforts and start to pin those things down. And then all this other stuff we've been talking about, the client drama or the wins and the losses and all that kind of stuff will start to come along, but just simply by virtue of the people you've met along the way.
Yeah, and I think we all need to start to connect with all those people we were cool with, the acquaintances, a little bit more. Just catch up with them, but also not try to be too salesy. Because it's also everyone's... When you do that, when you haven't spoken to someone in a while and you're trying to catch up, it's sometimes it just feels like, cool, what do you want?
Well, I think there's this thing that, especially for young people, but I mean, I'm affected by this sometimes too, so maybe not that young of people. But social media really paints this picture of the notion of the breakaway 25-year-old millionaire success story. Right. And it's not that those things don't happen. You do have your Zuckerbergs and you do have these people that created a thing that was revolutionary at the right time. Mm-hmm. And then they become, bazillionaires. Yeah. And so that does exist. But I think for most people, you go through like this process and it really becomes apparent the more you age. I'll turn 46 this month. And, to your point about looking at old relationships and things like that, everybody you went to high school with turned 46 this year too, in my case. And, so everybody else has gone through ups and downs and breakups and divorces and marriages and kids and promotions and growth in their businesses or their companies, or they've sold and bought, or they've whatever. And so everybody's gone through all these things. So reaching out to your core network or people that, even if it feels a little weird to reach out to a friend from high school, like if you were cool with somebody in high school, man, just reach out and be like, what's up? Hey, I see that nowadays you're doing this. Let's grab lunch. I'd just like to visit with you. I'm just reconnecting with old folks. You're not.
Some people are busy.
Well,
by the way,
sure.
I've tried doing that. I'm like, God damn,
and
like
people,
you do well. I just want to catch up.
Yeah, people will tell you no, and that's a thing too. But that's okay. And a lot of times people will say yes. And I think I mentioned this to you in another conversation. But like a big thing behind our podcast is it's opened doors to be able to have conversations with people that we wouldn't otherwise get to talk to. Right. Yeah. So like Bob Berg was the example I used earlier. Like Bob is not just like calling me to be like, what up, man? No, Bob wants to sell books or whatever. And he's really generous with his time. And,
and that's transactional and that's okay.
And he only gave us 30 minutes, but I had a show to put him on. So I had that platform to share with him. And we're not the biggest podcast in the world. There's a million big shows out there, but there's lots of little guys like us out there too. And we can get conversations or doors open that we wouldn't have before. I've had 400 CEOs and startup founders and people like that on our podcast at this point. And that network can get me to just about anybody. All the way up, like we've had a couple guys that are like friends with like Mark Cuban and stuff like that. So it's like if I had something compelling to say to Mark Cuban, I could try and leverage this relationship and say, hey, dude, can you try and get this in front of Mark Cuban? I don't have anything compelling to say, and I don't want to waste Mark's time or my friend's time. But, but these guys exist, and it's all that network, and so I gave them the thing for free. I let them come on my podcast to talk about their business. So that was me giving. And then one of these days, if I wanted to ask them for something, they could try and meet me in the middle. And as long as the ask is sort of commensurate with what I gave, so it's like, okay, I exposed you to X number of thousands of people. They talked about your business. Maybe you got a little bump. Maybe you made some money, whatever. Now, hey, can you just put the sticky note on Cuban's desk? And if he's interested in the concept, then we'll talk and we can do all that other stuff. But if not, fine. If that's the ask, then okay, maybe that's not that big a deal. But if it's like, hey man, I need you to start buying our stuff now, like maybe that's a bridge too far. So it's like, so I think there's a lot of things to consider in terms of like balance too, making sure that your ask is commensurate with what you give. And if you're not getting big enough offers, like if you're not getting big enough favors in return, then maybe you didn't give enough up front. So maybe instead of, hey, let me do that brochure for you, it's, hey, let me build out your whole brand for you. And then when I come back to you and I say, hey, man, well, you need a website and I sell websites, would you be willing to work with me? It's like, okay, well, I guess you are that guy that gave us, $10,000 worth of work for free. So let's at least consider it, So I think that, there's a way to do that doesn't come off as transactional, where you actually earn the equity with people. I heard somebody talk about it like, I think it was as it pertains to politics. Somebody was talking about the notion of political capital. which is sort of this notion of, you've built up goodwill with people, so then when you need a thing, you can ask. And I think that that's kind of something you could factor into, a small design practice or maybe even a big one. I mean, the reason people pay Pentagram all the money they pay is because Pentagram has built up all this capital, this creative capital that is highly valuable. And now when they say they want something from me or whatever, like, it's hard for me to break in because they have all the capital and I have none. But when they want to work with somebody, they just go, oh, we're Pentagram. And they go, oh, okay, cool. We'd love to work with you. So I think there's something to that notion of this intangible capital that you start to build. And again, I don't want to turn relationships into something transactional. But I mean,
there is a sense of
at the same time, there's a little
leveraging it.
Yeah. Well, it's the kind of thing you do for your friends. Like, if you don't even think about
Absolutely.
business, but you just, you hook up your friends, you hang out with your friends,
what
you
is
do things for your friends.
It makes me think of the town, because it's the one scene is the truest thing when it comes to friendships. I mean, you can't do this to in business.
Isn't that like a bank robbing thing? So I mean, I guess
it
if
is,
things
but
don't work out great, you'd rob the bank. So.
Something happens where like they're bothering this one woman. The guy's like interested in it before and maybe started dating her. He wants to teach him a lesson to stop bothering people. Ben Affleck's character comes in, says, I need you to come with me. Can't ask me any questions. Can't ever speak about it again. But we're gonna go right now. I'm gonna hurt some people. He's like, tell me when. And it was just kind of one of those things. They just went, no answer, no questions asked. We're bros. Yeah. We're best friends. We're cool. Got it. And enough of that.
That's your ride or die. And if you had that kind of relationship with a client, I mean, could you imagine? You would never not work together. I mean, think of all these. I mean, just using movies as an example. I mean, how many movies is like Ben Affleck and Matt Damon in together? Right? Do you think that just happens by random accident? I mean, like, there's a reason they were in Good Will Hunting together, and they were in the old like Mallrats movies and stuff like that together, and they've been in a million things since then.
High school.
Yeah, they're best friends. They were in drama club together in high school and all that stuff. Those guys have been this ride or die relationship forever. So it's like, hey, I'm Ben Affleck. I'm directing this movie. Well, I'm calling Damon, dude. Like, he's my guy. And you see that in all these movies where it's the same 10 actors across 50 different films.
Adam Sandler's like the best at doing that. Like,
he's a perfect connector. Yeah, he's exactly that. Yeah, I mean, he's directing this film, and so, I'm going to call the 10 guys I know best. And you see that part. Yeah, you see that everywhere in Hollywood. It's like the same 40 actors do every movie.
It's all about, again, it's about who you know and who you're friends with. And so I think the moral of the story, as you mentioned, is be intentional and try to leverage your friendships, your relationships that you know with people, and try to at least get you to another connection. It's all about connecting the dots. Yep. Take it back to when you were 5 and you were using a coloring book and you had to draw those numbers to create whatever shape at the end. It's all about connecting it all together and making it work.
Yep. Yeah, and I think intent is, I mean, and I know it gets kind of overplayed by the sort of the wishy-washy or the, woo-woo types, but this notion of being intentional, for good or for bad, I mean, you can have bad intentions too, but the notion of intention is that I'm doing this thing on purpose. And I think by doing that, to your point, if paint by numbers is the metaphor, I mean, I want to get this picture done on purpose. And so I'm going to follow this process of painting by numbers to get it done. And I think you can do something similar, apply that to just about anything you do.
Ryan, let me just ask a couple quick rapid fire questions for you. Just think off the top of your head. All right, so let's start easy. Are you a morning or a night person?
Morning.
Coffee or tea?
Both, but mostly coffee.
Okay. Liquor or beer? If you're a drinker.
When I was younger, beer. Now that I'm older, liquor. And it has more to do with trying to not be fat.
Got it.
But I will tell you, I've become kind of a bourbon guy lately, and it's becoming a problem. Like, trying to get fancy bourbons and stuff has become a thing, and it's making a challenge.
I've had a whiskey tasting. I went a whiskey tasting one time. So the one guy brought a bunch of samples. My favorite is Jefferson's Reserve, but Jefferson's Ocean.
Okay.
Because so obviously it seems like every founding father did something else besides fight the British and fight tyranny. The buzzwords so SEO could pick it up later on. But so the quick history behind it is that Jefferson's Reserve is Thomas Jefferson's whiskey. Tasty, great. It even has the a picture of a White House on the front of the bottle. Fancy looking bottle. I finished mine. I still holding it because I just kind of like it. Jefferson's Ocean is awesome because a bunch of whiskey drinkers who are, I guess they had a boat and they took barrels of the whiskey. They went sailing all over, down to South America, came back up, and then when they took it to drink it, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. It tastes different. And they found out because of the way the barrel and the ocean, the salt water, kind of the atmosphere mixture, it kind of changed the taste because in the barrel.
Yeah.
So now they do travels.
Oh, that's
and,
awesome.
like,
I just
for
saw a
me, it's
bottle
my
of this at my local shop just the other day, so I'm gonna have to go back and get some.
Oh, you have to. Like, I say Jefferson's Ocean's better, but Jefferson's Reserve is exquisite.
I'll try it. I'll try them. Yeah, and I'll report back.
It's worth the bottle. Yeah, let me know. Otherwise, this part's getting cut out.
Well, that's all right. This sounds like a sponsor opportunity. So for Jefferson's Ocean, friend, let's try to get a sponsorship deal.
Oh, you kidding me? Let me just drink. I gotta drink my salty water. It's a great electrolyte drink.
I know. I've been drinking my Liquid Death all day, though. I make sure to position the label towards the camera, though.
I really do like this drink though. It's really good. It's got a bunch of flavors. It's a nice little startup too. So I got to ask this because this has always been one of my favorite questions to ask. What's your favorite curse word?
I'm a big fan of the classic. Is my word, but the reason is because it's one of the few words that still will make me go ooh. Yeah, my wife curses like a sailor, but well, and I guess I'm no saint. But I love it in more than one way. I've got lots of facets for love for that word. Like. Also, which is Spanish, but I really like that one.
Has your Spanish improved?
Yeah. I mean, like, I'm still probably pretty terrible, but I'm good enough that they'll humor me nowadays and can at least kind of communicate, and that's kind of the goal. It's not really about being
dango
perfect.
Hombre.
Yeah, it's not about being perfect. It's being able to communicate. And, for a lot of these guys that I know from Spain that don't speak great English, for me to have some Spanish and them to have some English, we can kind of meet in the middle. So it facilitates communication, and communication builds relationships. So it's all full circle.
Absolutely. And that is how we'll end it today, everybody. I would like to thank Ryan. Ryan, where can everybody find you if they're looking to just do anything? We'll touch on Rog Health another time because I'm sure I enjoy this conversation, and I think what we spoke about being intentional and relationships is super important and it's necessary. So hopefully we'll see a part 2 coming soon. But like I said, where can everybody find you and reach you if they need to want to connect or build a relationship with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first place to start, especially if you're not looking for something business-centric or if you just want to build a relationship or talk about any of the things we've talked about today and beyond, you can also find some of my art and things like that I do over at ryanroghaar.com. That's RyanRoghaar.com. You can find my business, the new med device consultancy, at roguehealth.com. It's ROGhealth.com. You can learn a little bit more about what we're doing over there. And that's kind of it. Those are probably the hot spots. I guess you can find me over to Eggs, the podcast, as well as the show that we do.
Thank you very much. And I'm Joe Baron. You can always find me at brandonbaron.com. And this is Market to Me. Bye, everybody.